In the autumn of 2003, Exeter City Football Club was on the verge of no longer existing. The chairman and vice-chairman had been arrested on charges of financial irregularities. The man who had contacted the police was the club's co-chairman, the celebrity spoonbender, Uri Geller. The club had £4.5 million in debt. It had just been relegated from the Football League. And the owner had decided he no longer wanted to run it. What happened next is one of the quietest revolutions in English football. A group of fans, ordinary supporters with ordinary jobs, agreed to take control of the club for £20,000 along with every piece of debt. 22 years later, Exeter City are still in professional football. They are still owned by those fans. And they are the blueprint that every other fan ownership project in England has been measured against since. To understand what the Exeter City Supporters Trust achieved, you have to understand the state of the club it inherited. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Exeter City had been through a series of financial scrapes. The ownership had changed hands multiple times. In the 2002-2003 season, the club was relegated from the Football League, ending an 83-year stay in the professional game. At that time, the club was effectively being run by Chairman John Russell and Vice-Chairman Mike Lewis. The co-chairman was Uri Geller, the Israeli-British celebrity best known for claiming he could bend metal spoons with his mind. Geller had bought into the club as a celebrity investor. On the 14th of May 2003, shortly after the relegation, Russell and Lewis were arrested. Allegations of financial irregularities had been made to the police. The person who had contacted the police was Uri Geller. The arrests were a turning point. The immediate consequence was that Exeter City no longer had functioning directors. The Supporters Trust, a small organisation that had been formed in May 2000 with the modest aim of helping the club pay a player's wages, found itself suddenly appointed to the board. Over the following months, the existing owner, Uri Geller, asked the trust to take over the day-to-day running of the club. The debt had grown to £4.5 million. The stadium, St James Park, needed urgent structural work. The trust had to decide what to do. On the 5th of September 2003, representatives of the Exeter City Supporters Trust travelled to the Exeter jewellery shop owned by Uri Geller. They brought a cheque for £20,000. In return, they received Dobell's majority shareholding in the club, 53.6% of the voting shares. That cheque bought two things. It bought control of a professional football club, and it bought £4.5 million of unpaid debts. Within weeks, the trust negotiated a company voluntary arrangement with the creditors. 88% of creditors accepted the arrangement. They would be paid approximately 7.1 pence on the pound of what they were owed. It was, from a legal standpoint, a haircut. From the trust's standpoint, it was the only way to save the club. In October 2003, Exeter City entered the new season as a fan-owned, non-league club. They had a volunteer workforce rebuilding the terraces at St James Park. They had no money for transfers. They had a professional squad that was, on paper, lower league standard. And they had, most crucially, an academy that was still running, because the trust had made a specific decision to protect it from the cost-cutting that everything else faced. Exeter's biggest financial break came in January 2005. They were drawn away to Manchester United in the third round of the FA Cup. Old Trafford, live television, the tie that every non-league club in the country would have given anything for. Exeter travelled to Manchester in good order. They held United to a 0-0 draw at Old Trafford on live television. They were duly rewarded with a home replay at St James Park televised again. They lost the replay 2-0, with goals from Cristiano Ronaldo and Wayne Rooney. But the financial implications of those two matches were extraordinary. The income from the two games, broadcast rights, ticket sales, the replay windfall, totaled close to £1 million. That one draw at Old Trafford, plus the televised replay, effectively cleared the debt the Supporters' Trust had inherited. By 2007, the £4.5 million of outstanding obligations had been substantially reduced. The football club that had been technically insolvent less than 2 years earlier was, after one FA Cup tie, suddenly viable. Russell and Lewis, meanwhile, had both been charged with criminal offences related to their time at the club. Russell was sentenced to 21 months in prison in April 2007. Lewis received 200 hours of community service. In February 2008, both were permanently banned from football by the FA. The most important decision the Supporters' Trust made in their first years of ownership was not about debt management or stadium repair. It was about the academy. At a time when every single budget line was being cut, the question was whether to close the youth development structure entirely. It would have saved money in the short term. Most struggling clubs do this. Exeter did not. Julian Tagg, a prominent trust member who later became club president, led the internal fight to keep the academy open. His argument was simple. A club that cannot afford to buy players must, by definition, produce them. If the academy closed, there was no long-term recruitment pathway. The trust agreed. The academy stayed open. That decision is, in hindsight, the single most important commercial move Exeter City have made in the 21st century. What followed over the next 2 decades is an academy output that the rest of English football has been trying to replicate ever since. Matt Grimes was sold to Swansea City in January 2015. Ethan Ampadu, who made his first team debut at 15 years and 10 months, breaking a club record held for 83 years by the legendary Cliff Bastin, joined Chelsea in 2017. Ben Christine went to Aston Villa, Sean Goss to Manchester United, Jay Stansfield to Fulham, and the most famous graduate of them all, Ollie Watkins. Ollie Watkins joined Exeter City's academy at under-11 level. He had actually failed a trial at the club aged 9 in 2003, the same year the Supporters' Trust took over. He returned 2 years later. He rose through the youth ranks. He scored 30 goals for the under-18 team in the 2013-14 season. He made his senior debut in April 2014. In July 2017, he was sold to Brentford. The deal was worth approximately £5 million with add-ons. That was not the end of the Exeter payday. The Supporters' Trust, running the club on sustainable principles, had negotiated a sell-on clause when they sold Watkins to Brentford. When Brentford sold him to Aston Villa in September 2020 for a club record £28 million, Exeter City received £4 million plus further performance add-ons. Watkins went on to score the winning goal in the Euro 2024 semi-final against the Netherlands. He is now Aston Villa's all-time Premier League top scorer, having overtaken Gabriel Agbonlahore's record of 74 goals in May 2025. That is what a functioning academy can do for a fan-owned club. It can produce a player who starts by failing a trial at 9 and finishes as an England international, scoring the goal that takes his country to a European Championship final. And along the way, it funds the club that produced him. Exeter City are currently in League One. The Supporters' Trust still controls the majority of voting shares in the club. As of April 2025, the Trust had passed 5,000 active members. Membership costs the equivalent of £2 per month. Trust board members are elected by that membership at annual general meetings. Trust-nominated directors sit on the football club board alongside independent club directors. The Trust has contributed over £2 million to the club since taking over in 2003. The estimated value of volunteer work has been placed at £250,000 per year. Exeter City have also been named the top club on the UK Fan Engagement Index for 4 consecutive years. There have been occasional difficulties. In 2014, the club took a short-term loan of £100,000 from the Professional Footballers Association to help with running costs. It triggered a transfer embargo. It drew criticism of the Trust's governance. The Trust responded by restructuring the club's board and increasing its own representation. The incident illustrates something important about the Exeter model. It is not a utopia. It is a functioning, democratic structure that has faced real problems and responded to them transparently. Exeter City were not the first fan-owned club in England. AFC Wimbledon had been formed a year earlier. FC United of Manchester followed in 2005. But Exeter were the first fan-owned club in English professional football. They proved that the model could operate not just at the grassroots, but inside the competitive structure of the EFL. Every fan ownership project that followed has been measured against what Exeter did. The Trust does not pretend to own the football club in the conventional sense. In 2021, then Chairman Nick Hawker told the BBC, "Who owns the club? Nobody really. Most clubs in the United Kingdom were born in the late 1800s or early 1900s, often through churches or working men's clubs, and they are so deeply rooted in the community. We don't own Exeter City. It's in our safekeeping." That is the Exeter philosophy. The club is a thing held in trust. It is not a business owned by an individual. It is an institution kept alive by the people who care about it most. Subscribe because the pyramid goes deeper than you think. Welcome to the Football Pyramid.